Ishmael, according to the Bible, was Abraham's first son, born when Abraham was 86 years old and living near Hebron. In Genesis 15, God promises Abraham during an apparition that he will have a son and become the father of many nations. At that time, Abraham had no children, and his wife Sarah was unable to conceive, leading them to question how this promise would be fulfilled. In Genesis 16:3, Sarah, who was still called Sarai, suggests to Abraham, who was still called Abram, to have a child with her Egyptian maidservant Hagar, whom she gives to him as a wife. This was a common custom of the time, where a wife would offer a servant to her husband, and all children born from this union would be considered hers. This early form of surrogacy allowed a barren woman to provide her husband with children who would be raised by her. However, this arrangement created more problems than it solved. Hagar did conceive a child with Abraham, and when she learned she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarah. Sarah sought help from Abraham, and the situation became tense. Abraham allowed Sarah to act as she wished, and Sarah mistreated Hagar, who eventually fled from her. It is important to note that Ishmael was legally Sarah's child, as Sarah, being barren, had obtained a son from Hagar. However, the relationship between Sarah and Hagar grew increasingly strained over time. God established a covenant with Abraham, requiring the circumcision of all male members of his household, including Ishmael. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael was 13. The birth of Isaac, the legitimate son of Sarah and Abraham, further exacerbated the tensions between Sarah and Hagar. The discord between them had already begun before Ishmael's birth. In the desert, the angel of the Lord met Hagar and ordered her to return to Abraham. It was also there that the angel of the Lord told her that the son she was carrying was to be named Ishmael, which means God has heard. The Lord heard Hagar's distress. Sarah's distress reached its peak when Isaac was weaned, and she asked Abraham to send away Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham considered Ishmael, the son God had promised him, and questioned the need for Isaac's birth since Ishmael could be his heir. Sarah saw Ishmael as a threat to Isaac's place in the family and wanted to get rid of him. Abraham's resistance to Sarah's request to expel Hagar and Ishmael suggests that such treatment was not in accordance with the standards of the time. The request seemed to contravene ancient laws, as children of maidservants could be demoted but not dismissed without valid cause. Sarah perceived Ishmael as a rival to Isaac, not because of any act he may have committed, but simply because of his existence. The author of Genesis recounts the story of Ishmael to establish a contrast between Isaac and Ishmael, not as individuals but as representations of God's work. This contrast highlights that when God kept his promises to Abraham, he was not constrained by natural and ordinary laws. Although God's preference for Isaac as the son of the wife conforms to custom, the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael made the contrast more striking. Hagar and Ishmael were sent away into the wilderness. However, God had plans for Ishmael and assured Hagar that Ishmael, as Abraham's son, would become a great nation. In Genesis 25:18, it is reported that Ishmael had 12 sons who became powerful leaders and eventually formed a nation. Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, and his descendants dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, east of Egypt, as they moved toward Assyria. Ishmael, the first son of Abraham, played a significant role in biblical history. He is often compared to Jacob, who also had 12 sons. Additionally, Nahor and Esau had 12 sons each, further highlighting the significance of the number 12 in Ishmael's lineage. Interestingly, Ishmael's daughter married Esau's son Isaac, further connecting their families. Genesis 28:9, Genesis 36:3. The region where Ishmael's descendants lived, known as Havilah, was located in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. It was a desert region situated between BBA in the Nevada Desert and Egypt. Isaiah 60:7 mentions that the descendants of Neth and Kedar, who were part of Ishmael's lineage, were known for their sheep breeding. From the beginning, Ishmael's descendants, known as Arabs, were a nomadic and warlike people. They lived in hostility toward all their brothers, fulfilling God's prediction that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man, with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. Genesis 16:12. Although Isaac remained the sole heir of Abraham's promises, Ishmael and Abraham's other sons by concubines were also blessed by him. Genesis 25. This indicates that Hagar's sons, including Ishmael, received material goods from Abraham. The Bible does not report any conflicts between Ishmael and Isaac once they had grown. In fact, they are both described as burying Abraham together. Genesis 25. The names of Ishmael's descendants mentioned in the Bible correspond to influential tribal families of that time. They were organized into 12 tribes living in movable camps in the southern desert. Genesis 25. Ishmael lived to the age of 137 before his death. Genesis 25:17. And although the Bible does not specify where he was buried, Muslim tradition places his tomb at the Kaaba in Mecca. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul references Ishmael in his allegory, contrasting the legalistic religious persecutors with those born according to the Spirit and enjoying freedom in Christ. Galatians. The name Ishmael became relatively common, and other characters in the Bible bear that name. One notable figure was the son of Nethaniah, a member of the royal house of David, who played a significant role during the period of Babylonian oppression against the Jews. Jeremiah 41:15. In conclusion, Ishmael, as Abraham's son, held a unique position in biblical history. Although he was not the son of God's promise, God still protected him and destined him for greatness. Ishmael's descendants formed 12 tribal clans and played influential roles in the region. The merging of Ishmaelites with other peoples, such as the Midianites, led to an assimilation between the groups. Today, many Arabs claim descent from Ishmael, and there is evidence to support this claim, although not all Arabs can trace their origins back to Ishmael. The story of Ishmael transcends an individual biography, highlighting God's work and grace in the history of salvation.